joint meeting with the school committee. It is Thursday, September 28th. I will take a roll call attendance. Kevin. Not so Kevin. Steve.
Yep.
Tracy.
Yes.
Sandy. Here. Joe.
Yep.
Bill is not going to be here tonight. Paul.
Here.
Cody.
Here.
Zach.
Here.
Bonnie is running slightly late, and I am here. Okay, so we sent some questions to you.
Yes.
That we went over a couple weeks ago. So maybe we could just get started on the questions that we sent. I
Sure.
assume that you all saw them.
Dr. O'Neill?
Yes, of course. So thank you all for coming to meet with us tonight. We greatly appreciate it. We very much like the idea of talking about budget, as early as possible, because I think, for those of us who have been in Norton for a long time, we know that this is a constant conversation. So thank you all for being here with us tonight. You had a number of questions that Christine and I have prepared for you, and I asked our leadership team to be here tonight as well, so that way if there were specific questions about special education or facilities, you could hear directly from them as they are the experts as well. So one of the papers that Christine shared with you is the overall look at our grants and the revolving accounts. This year, if the page looks like this, it's the blue on the top and the yellow on the bottom. This year, that is our grants down the bottom. As you can see, we have over just about $2.6 million worth of grants that are coming in for this current year. All of that ranges from our federal special education IDEA grant, which is roughly $741,000, all the way down to the Title III grant, which is a new grant for us this year, which is about $18,000. We are very fortunate to have a number of these entitlement grants that we receive every year, and that helps us to provide a lot of staffing for our classrooms and for our programs. For example, the IDEA grant is almost 100% staffing, as well as the Early Education 262 grant, as well as the Title I grant for $283,938. The grants that we receive, these entitlement grants that I mentioned, they are fully staffed and allow us to provide more services to our students. This year, from FY23 to FY24, there was about a $30,000 increase in the IDEA grant. Title I was just a couple $100 extra. We did see a decrease in the Title IIA grant, which is the $47,000 grant. That is where 99% of our funding comes for professional development for all of our staff. So any teacher training, we have roughly 400 staff members, and we need to provide them training and high quality professional development with that small amount of money.
What was it last year?
It was $50,912. So it's not a huge amount of money to begin with. We really do not have professional development budgeted in our district budget, and we have not in all the 12 years that I have been in central office. So that's something that we always talk about. The Title III grant, which I mentioned is a new grant for us this year, $18,877. That is specifically to provide services to our English language learner students. Norton has never been eligible to apply on their own. So this year, for the first time, we have established a consortium with Seekonk Public Schools. And Dr. Ackerman, our new assistant superintendent, is running that grant with the support of their assistant superintendent in Seekonk. So we get a portion of it, and Seekonk receives a portion of it as well, based on the number of our students that are English language learners.
How many students is that?
We have 57 currently.
So looking at these grants,
Mhm.
I guess my question is which ones do we anticipate possibly not receiving year over year?
So if,
There's been a lot of talk about the ESSER
Yep.
3. Is that one that's potentially is going away?
Yes, so the ESSER 3 grant, we have $592,000. This is the last year that we can use that money at all. And it is currently being used to subsidize our budget with staffing. So when we talk about budget planning later this fall, we will be starting almost $600,000 in the hole because we will no longer have that ESSER funding, which has been around since COVID.
Why, was it COVID related?
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yep, so the ESSER grants, there was ESSER 1, 2, and 3. Norton received, and I'm not going to know it's off the top of my head, over the 3 grants, roughly, one was a small amount of money, one was 1.7 million.
This was 1.7.
Yeah, one was one was like 700,000-ish.
790 something, yeah.
Okay, so we received a good chunk of money over the years during COVID and since COVID. And unfortunately, just because of our increasing costs over the years, we had to use that money to support and supplement our budget. We were not able to use it like other districts did for one-time costs, such as curriculum purchases or technology purchases. This went almost totally to staff. Yes, I know, right, Paula? And then looking at these other, oh, please, go ahead.
Dr. O'Neill, so was there any of that was going towards an increase in headcount, or that's purely used to offset existing roles?
So there are a few new roles that were added over time. We did have a few roles that looked specifically at providing students with interventions. We had a few interventionists that were added during COVID and the years since, specifically math interventionists at the elementary levels. So those are added positions. And we also had a floating nurse during when we returned to school on that part-time basis. Just the amount of testing that was required of our nursing staff and additional work. We did have that floating nurse. However, we had a resignation last year. One of our nurses resigned to go to another community, and we did not refill that position. So that was something that was an additional cost, was an additional head, but is no longer there.
So as we go through the planning for those positions, obviously, here's a $600,000 delta, I'm going to call it, right? What's the planning that goes into it? Or we just we'll do 1 year at a time, or do we project out the impact could be X? If we don't fund another $600,000, what do we do?
So, and I don't want to speak for everyone here, but the goal has always been that if you add a position, whether you are doing that through school choice or you are doing that through a grant, is that you are hoping to move at least a portion of that salary into the general budget for the following year, so you can piecemeal it and eventually move it into the budget full-time. Unfortunately, just with the rising costs of special education and other things that we have here, transportation, we haven't been able to do that as much as we would have liked. As you all know, I was the assistant superintendent when we started receiving these grants, and when we initially wrote them, we wrote them for things such as a new math curriculum, K-8, a new ELA curriculum. We wrote them for really incredible professional development for our staff, things that we knew we could purchase one time and then move on. But unfortunately, when you have to cut other things from your budget, you have to find a place to backfill. And Dinesh, we've been sitting at this table for a long time, and same thing with school choice. School choice was never intended to fund staffing positions. We started with the kindergarten free full day K a number of years ago.
Nobody hates
I know.
using one-time revenue for operational expenses more than me, trust me.
So
Nobody hates it more than me.
that's always been the plan, but unfortunately it hasn't always been how it has been executed. The question was around what grants can we not expect to see back. When you look at the bottom of this column, the building capacity through high quality ed tech for $49,104. That was a competitive grant that Mrs. Winsper earned this year with her team. It is not for staffing, it is just to enhance programming. And then the Innovation Pathways Grant, that was something that Dr. Dolliman received with the support of his staff for enhancing our innovative pathways around manufacturing here at Norton High School. Again, not for staffing, just for programming. And then the Summer Acceleration Academy, we've run that for 3 summers in a row now. That is to provide students with a week-long camp, so to speak, where the focus is solely on academics. Students are invited here for a week. We feed them breakfast, we feed them lunch, we get them to and from school, and we provide them with a really deep dive in either math or ELA based on specific student data and around their needs. So
All grades?
last year was just K to 6. We've done the high school program before, and the kids don't come. I don't know why, because I would totally want to come to school in the summer too, but, so those 3 grants at the bottom are not for general budget.
Can I ask a question before you move on?
Please.
Can we just back up a little bit? I mean,
Yes.
last we left, I was at, I think, it was either one of the last school committee meetings, and they were making some cuts, and you were looking at some grants over the summer, and music and foreign languages were being cut at the middle school, and a bunch of other things. Can you just recap us what transpired over the summer, where we are, where we sit today before we move forward?
Yes, absolutely. So because of a slight increase in the IDEA grant, we were able to move 1 paraprofessional into that grant, which saved us $29,000 on the general budget side of things, so that was nice there. And then we had a number of staffing changes over the summer, including a few long-term absences where people were taking a year off. And so we were able to save that high salary and backfill their positions with someone, a long-term sub, someone who was right out of school. So because of that, we were able to reinstate the music position at the Yale School, which therefore allowed for the music band and choral program at Norton Middle School to remain intact. So Zach, you were at that meeting.
Yes.
Last year, and people were, a lot of people came out to talk about the music program and how important it is to our school community. So that was our first priority, and we were able to do that, which is really exciting. So our final layoffs for the year were the 2 Norton Middle School world language teachers. One of them actually fell into a different position inside the district, and then the other one was a full layoff. A layoff of an administrative assistant at Norton Middle School, and then also the district communications coordinator was a layoff. So 4 people total.
What was that last position you said? Sorry.
The district communications coordinator.
Oh, right.
So for this budget year, there's a lot of numbers here.
Yes.
We're in good shape. Before we get into, it's a relevant term. The lights are gonna still be on by the end of the school year? I mean,
I'm going to let Christine talk about the budget that you have in front of you. She provided a full line item, projected versus expended, and then she's also going to talk about special education costs.
Just quickly
Please,
before
yeah.
that, the long-term absences, you said you backfilled with long-term subs or younger teachers just out of school.
Yes.
Are those long-term absences coming back, and those are just a temporary fix, so they're going to come back at the higher salaries once they're back?
Potentially, yes. And so, we had this conversation earlier. It's hard to know when people take a leave if they're going to come back or not, but we are required by contract to hang on to their job for the year. So when we build our budget, Christine will have that higher salary in there, and that will be our starting point. And those people that have been filling in those positions know it's a 1-year position, and that they will likely get laid off at the end of this year.
And there has been times in years past where they choose not to come back. We've had that at least every year I've been doing this.
Yes, agreed.
Someone, whether it's maternity leave, family, whatever it is, we've had some teachers that just don't come back, which, we hate to lose them, but budget-wise, we don't mind them leaving. No offense.
How many of these teachers are on the long-term absence?
We have 2. Three. We have 3. Yes, 3. Okay, yeah.
And they only get 1 school year leave, right?
Yes.
It's not like it's 2 or 3 years, right?
No, and in the past, people were allowed to take a longer leave with the superintendent's permission. We've tightened up that contract language since we entered into our last contract. So it's 1 year. and they need to let us know by March 1st if they're returning or not.
So you'll see on our budget to actuals, this is currently just for the month of September. We have encumbered all of our payroll items that we know of other than hourly, and also all of our predicted expense lines as well. Right now, we have an ending balance of $500,392. So that is okay, I'd say right now. Primarily, most of those balances are in this facility line, so we have no idea what's going to happen as the year goes on, as well as some of the hourly positions too. Behind that, we have our out-of-district tuition and transportation costs.
It has the pink on the bottom?
Yep. This one is kind of our wild card. So the ones we were not anticipating that that is unexpected are in the pink on the bottom. So these are all new, and that is, you'll see the total that says for FY24, $728,315. Now, we do have placeholders. Every year we save about $100,000 depending on the current rates, and also $70,000 for collaborative. So we do one for each. So if you take away those savings, plus we had some placement changes that happened over the summer, that's another almost $200,000 savings. So the unanticipated costs right now that we have that are very new are $362,256. We also have out-of-district transportation, which is a very large majority of our out-of-district spending. You can see the total is around 1.2 million right now. That is over what we budgeted, and unanticipated is around 105. The current range for the special education out-of-district transportation right now is anywhere between $220 a day and $350 a day.
So I think it's important for both committees to know that all of the placements here that you're seeing in pink are things that have come up since probably late August. Whether it is students that are moving in, or students that are currently in district that are having, we're not able to meet their needs with the programming that we have. So it's, as you can see, an increase of $728,000 is a huge amount of money. Thankfully, Christine does a great job in putting placeholders there. The special education office does an incredible job of looking at placements and making sure that they're appropriate for students, while also we joke, they're like, look at us, saving money. And I'm like, well, your bottom line's still a little bit big. But they are very cognizant about, making sure that we're finding the best option for students at a cost that is affordable. If you look at number 29, we have a student that was at the Boston Higashi School. Further up, you can see there is a blank space between 20 and 21. That student was a day student last year at $100,000. They are now a residential student, and the cost difference is another $176,000.
So I have two questions on this.
Please.
Well, one's a statement. So as we sit here, we'll call it October 1st for lack of communication. So this could all change November 1st. This pink could be 10 more lines. And we're still we have to incorporate it into our budget regardless. Okay. Now, my second question, with these in pink that are unanticipated, we have no relief from the state in any of these scenarios for this current budget. Like, we can't go to the state and be like, this Higashi school, call it $75,000. We can't get anything from the state to.
$175,000.
Well, I'm saying with the difference in last year to this year.
Oh, that is the difference.
Oh, okay.
The 176 is the difference.
Well, the question still stands.
Yes.
So can we get any relief from the state? Is there any programming for anything like this, or is it just?
Well, that's the circuit breaker. So when we apply for circuit breaker every spring, we get reimbursements from the state. And it can be anywhere between 60 and 80%. And then they started a few years back giving us a higher rate on transportation as well. So that is where, when you saw our funding uses in the spring, a good portion of that is coming from our circuit breaker. So no, we did not budget $3 million for tuitions, but the other half or more we pay out of that fund as well.
And Christine, just to correct me if I'm wrong, the state only reimburses that 65 to 80% of anything over and above $40,000.
That's correct.
So we own the first $40,000 automatically, regardless of where the placement is, and then we can see a reimbursement of 65 to 80 over whatever dollar amount is over that. On the grant and revolving sheet that Christine shared with you earlier, the circuit breaker that she was just talking about is the very first line. We're bringing in $675,000 this year in circuit breaker reimbursement.
The
When
six,
does that come in?
so the 70,000 is what we carried over last year. And the reason why it's blank on the anticipated revenue is because you get it quarterly. The first quarter is always late. So you usually get it in October, but last year we didn't get it till the end of November. And you have an idea of what it's gonna be, which we predicted around 1.4 million. We're hoping a little higher because we think the transportation rate's gonna come a little higher. But we won't know that till, I'm thinking now, November.
I have two questions on this. A student goes out, whatever the issue is, and you have to, who makes the decision to send them out? Is it Norton School District? Is it an independent party? Who makes that decision that you can't provide the services that that student needs? And secondly, how is this evaluated as the year goes on? If a student has X, maybe he got better and we can now bring him back, how does that all work?
Absolutely. So a decision to place a child out is made by the educational team, which includes representatives from Norton, the parent. But I'm gonna let Vinny talk, or Casey, talk more specifically about the process. Come on over so we can all see you. She'll be able to give you better details than I can, Zach.
Those are wonderful questions. They are not easy decisions to make by any stretch of the imagination. So typically, we collect data for a significant period of time to try to track interventions that we've tried, see what's working, what's not working, and then we have to sit down and really make the decision about whether or not we can sustain that student within our districts. We've spent the past couple of years really building up our specialized programs for social emotional needs, autism, language-based disabilities, and are in students with cognitive and intellectual disabilities as well, to really try to avoid those out-of-district placements as much as possible. But the students that we're placing out are at a level that's beyond our capabilities here. So like Dr. Neal said, we sit as a team to really review all of the data and all of the student needs and make that difficult decision. We typically look at collaborative settings first, as those are both cheaper and we are members of those districts, so we can, or those programs, so we can have a little bit more say in what's happening there. The biggest issue that, as Christine and Dr. Neal said, is that transportation piece. Tuitions are not pleasant, but transportation is really the biggest thing that gets in our way as well. We have one student that's going to Boston daily, and I think it's $350 per day to get him to and from. So there's a lot of factors there. We also, as part of my job as out-of-district coordinator, I meet with these students' families multiple times per week, and not per week, I apologize, throughout the year, and go out to the schools to monitor the progress and see how things are going there and what's actually being done in those school settings. During COVID, it was very difficult to do that because schools were closed to outsiders coming in, but now that the schools are opening back up, we're trying to get back out there and really see what's happening. A lot of times, we've actually brought back, I believe, 6 students in the past 3 years from out of district into our school-based programs, 2 of which came back this year alone for the start of this year. So we're really trying to monitor that progress. It's always our goal to have kids both in our community and in our schools, but also to, not only for the community experience, but also for that financial piece as well is a big piece. So it's a constant visiting of those, of those data points.
But do you ever move a student mid-year, or is it usually done by year,
Yeah, there are times when we do lose mid-year, and typically that is if there has been a major behavioral change or something significant has happened medically. And those are typically something that we're aware of happening. The biggest issue mid-year or later in the summer are the move-ins. Collaboratives, we have to take the brunt of those costs immediately when a child moves into district. Private schools, we have a year to kind of, to deal with that. So if it's before April 1st or after April 1st, we can balance, we are not responsible for that cost. So we can kind of budget for that as the year goes on. But if a student moves in, like this year, we had 3 students move in August that were in collaborative programs, and we immediately assume those costs when they come to us.
and the transportation, that is being handled by Bloom? By a taxi? Are you putting them in Ubers? I mean, how is that?
It would probably be cheaper if we did put them in.
Well, I'm thinking, that's what I'm thinking, to be honest with
But
you.
legally, we can't do that. So we try to use Bloom as much as possible because we've got such a great working relationship with them, and their costs essentially are one of the cheapest around, or one of the most reasonable around. And then if Bloom is not able to do it, then we bid out to other transportation companies. And Christine and Alex Sanborn really work with them to try to get the best possible rate to provide our students that skill. And sometimes we can share with other towns if they have students going to the same school. There's an additional per student cost, but it's not the same flat rate for just one student on the van.
How does it work if the expectation, all the reviews and consultations that you have, the feeling is to come back to the school?
Mm-hmm.
And is there pushback or is it always accepted? Is it
Pushback from,
pushback saying, I disagree with the decision to come back, I'm going to stay in the
Oh, from the
collaborative?
family?
oh, from the family?
For families.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we don't typically broach that subject immediately, so it's something that we're always working towards it. As soon as we place a student out of district, we always have the goal of them returning at some point.
Okay.
And that's discussed from the get-go.
And then from a budgeting perspective,
Mm-hmm.
if you bring them back in school, your budget gets adjusted accordingly.
Correct.
If that changes, obviously, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So one thing I want to mention, I don't know if you touch on this, but when we talk about these kids in these specialized programs, they typically come with the IEP.
Mm-hmm.
That's a federally binding contract, so it's not like, we don't look at this and just say, oh, they're costing us money. We're legally bound to provide these services regardless of the cost. So, I mean, yes, we can sit here and talk about the numbers, but the numbers are going to stay the same because we have to provide the service.
Understood.
I don't want to put that out because I don't want us to just, come across as monsters, like, oh, you're costing us so much money. So, I mean, we do have a great special ed programming. Speaking from experience, I've known people that have gone out of district and come back. Typically, it's when they go out of district, they're given a set of goals in that collaborative to meet. So if it's something like a social emotional problem or learning soft skills, as they start approaching their goals, that's when those conversations that Casey mentioned with the family, the collaborative, that we all want all of our kids to stay here. And we had an undertaking probably about 6 years ago. We had someone on staff that would go out to these programs, and we saved a lot of money because we hadn't done that before, but it could be something as simple as, oh, we needed an iPad to meet some of their goals, so we can find money for an iPad, and that student's goals can be achieved with an iPad. That was a few years back, but the special ed department does a great job in doing that because, yes, it comes down to cost, but we also would think those children want to be with their peers, and we do want to keep them back.
And I think it's important for everyone to realize that, it's always a flexible situation. I was sitting with Vinny and Casey the other day, and we were talking about our out-of-district costs, and I asked the question, how many students did we have out of district when the two of you came into this role? And they had 64, and today we're talking about 35. So while the numbers have gone down, as we all know, costs everywhere have increased exponentially. Just go to the grocery store. I think I walked out of there the other night with like 15 items and it was $150 and I didn't know what just happened. So I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the work that the special education department has put in to make sure that our students are staying here as much as they can. But unfortunately, because we've done, it's it's kind of a double-edged sword. We've done such an incredible job of building our programs, of keeping our students, and I welcome any of you to come and see the work that is done in our classrooms. But the students that we're no longer able to keep here are students with very significant needs, and therefore the cost of educating them outside of the district is a lot.
Dr. Neal, can I
Yes,
jump in
please.
just for a
Yeah.
second? Because I think one of the things, the reality, excuse me, sorry, is that a number of our, our younger students especially did not get some of the early intervention services that, due to COVID, right, and things being shut down. So in all honesty, some of the severity of the behaviors, of the needs of the students that we're now starting to see to come into our programs. For example, at the LG North, we started with 2 programs just for students on the autism spectrum. We are now at 4. And the severity of those students, and because they didn't get those early skills, is pretty high, and requires a great deal of professional staff that is highly trained, and that we have time to train as we bring in new staff. And that's a big challenge for us. And there are students that, we're working very hard to maintain. But those are realities for our programs right now. And we're very lucky compared to a lot of districts, I think, that we are staffed. There's many districts out there that don't have staff. They can't find staff. But that's I just wanted to address yes, we've brought students back to this year. But on top of those early services not happening, Dinesh is going to love this one, but the state services that are out there are not what they were here 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So, sometimes you can do cost share, sometimes you can do those services are often not available to our families and our students. So we're trying to keep as many students as we can because it's the right thing to do. But there's a significant challenges out there right now in terms of their capacity to be kept in a public school setting with the staffing and the skills that we have.
So those kids come back whenever they're ready? It's not like once they're out we send them someplace, they're out until the end of the school year?
Yeah,
We try to limit the number of transitions, so if someone is, say, in 8th grade, and we think that they're ready to come back, we'll bring them back for start of 9th grade, or for summer school that year. It's really, the goal is to do what's best for kids.
Sure.
And minimize those transitions as best possible. But if they're in, say, 2nd grade, and in January, the team determines that they're ready to come back and come to one of our specialized programs, then that's what we'll do. It really is it's case by case.
And it's also often guided by the IEP. So when we're doing reevaluations, for example, so then you have to do that reevaluation in order to move to a less restricted environment. So there's lots of factors that go in. It's not unheard of, but typically it's at natural transition points, beginning of the year, natural transitions.
So of this nearly $5 million in special and outside services, how much are we getting back from the state in circuit breakers and all that? Is it roughly?
Well, we're anticipating around 1.4 to 1.5. And then we have a carryover of 600,000.
Okay, so they're not covering very much.
And then we've also budgeted on the other part of that. So we are, right now, if all these come to fruition, not in the greatest place.
And I think this is always the discussion we have year over year is these special ed and specialized costs, we can't do anything with them. And that's a big chunk of our budget. So laying them out this way kind of makes you put that number in perspective, because this is just, a large chunk of the budget to a point, but we also have, 2,500 plus other students that we have to have a budget for as well. These, I think 35 students are eating up probably 20% of the budget, give or take. So, that's always the thing that we always grapple with is this number is this number, we can't do anything with it. We're not gonna get it from the state. We know we're not gonna get it from the state. One of the plays that was mentioned for a couple of years was a transportation circuit breaker account for special ed, but it's the state, they're not gonna do it. So that's the constant year-over-year issue, is the special ed budget versus the general ed budget.
And so, as Dan mentioned, this, $4.7 million here is just for these 35 students that we're talking about right now.
And I think to that point, that's one of our questions going forward, why I think this reporting is critical, to understand what's going on with the other 500 students. The more we understand budget versus actuals, transfers, we have more of an education process for our team, other than spending so much time, we're hitting critical mass with special ed. Let's sit down and understand it, movements in, movements out. We completely understand that this budget is more than the 30+ million that we budget every year. So it's critical to see all this together
Thank you.
regularly.
And I think it's important to understand too, we talk about coming back, et cetera. I don't know any of these people by law, I shouldn't know, but I'm going to make the assumption that there are a number of students on here with an extremely high probability they're never coming back. They're just simply not. And we have to pay those bills until they're 25?
22. 22nd
Sorry,
birthday.
22 years old. So we do have some sense of certainty that some of these numbers are not going to go away. I don't know what those are, and I don't know what we can discuss or not discuss. But there's a high probability that a number of these students are not coming back, and we're going to have that number on our budget for the foreseeable future.
Is there more conversations at the state level? Obviously, this isn't limited to Norton, but where we can cross over between medical versus, because some of this is medical
So
costs,
it's
right?
funny you say that. One of your predecessors, and I don't recall how long you've been on the FinCom, but one of your predecessors years and years ago, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it was a while back, actually asked that question. He said, why isn't this covered by medical insurance? And honestly, it's a great question. I don't know. We're paying, and listen, I'm not trying to be callous, but the Higashi student, we're about to pay $176,000 additional to house the student. I'm just not sure how that's the responsibility of a school district, quite frankly. And again, I'm not saying it to be callous, but I don't understand why the onus falls on the school district to pay that number.
Is it
Right? I mean,
split
it's-
for residential though? Like, is it only the school, or does
So there-
insurance pay for like a PCA or like whatever?
It
else?
really depends upon why the student is there and what the services are that they're receiving. There are places where there are medical models where insurance will cover it. There's a school in Burlington, for example, where it is a medical school, or Mass Hospital School, or PAPAS is what's called now, and those are really insurance-based because they are for medical needs primarily. The students that we have outplaced right now, we do Medicaid circuit breakers and things along those lines, so there's some services that are Medicaid supported. A lot of that money goes directly to the out-of-district schools as well to help defray their costs. But it really is, it's viewed as a holistic educational experience, so that their inability to access home and get the supports there impacts their ability to be able to function in the school setting and access their academics that way. There are some students that we've historically cost shared with DMH or DCF or DDS for things, for residential services. Unfortunately, they're getting handcuffed as well in terms of what they can provide some finances for. DMH is saying they no longer provide funding for residential services, even if it is significant mental health that is keeping the child from being able to access school. So that's a problem. DCF is pretty much the one that we would work with most for anyone who's in DCF custody. Then it goes to residential. They would pay the residence piece, and we would pay the day school portion of that, or they would come here. But it really is case specific, unfortunately. And I mean, like any other state department, their budgets are getting slashed as well and not being able to provide the supports that they once did.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole school choice and state funding and like how that whole thing works.
Mhm.
If a student was here under school choice and then we deemed that we could not service them,
Yep.
It
goes back to it reverts
the-
back.
Yes.
Okay.
We actually have a situation currently where we have a school choice student that we deemed we could not support and put them and sent them to an out-of-district school, and that their hometown is, we are programmatically responsible, so we're still making all like the educational decisions, but their hometown is funding it, and the transportation piece for it as well.
And I think one of the larger populations that we're servicing both in our district and out of district is our students that are on the autism spectrum. And the state agencies really
Haven't decided who's
haven't done much
responsible.
for that, for those families and for those students and for school systems. It's our biggest population. It's probably one of our most needy populations. Parents need a lot of support, and the state really doesn't, have much for those students.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the ABA centers and autism centers are facing the same staffing shortfalls that everyone else is, and are cutting services significantly, which is then in turn increasing behaviors and difficulties that we're seeing in school. So it's very much a chicken and egg, or cats chasing their tail, or whatever it might be, kind of a situation. I mean, it's just, we're going around in circles.
It's been said in prior years' budgets that we're the victims of our own success, in the sense that we built out this robust program, and so I'm maybe an assumption, but I would assume at 35, these are all pretty severe cases.
Correct.
Are we seeing higher rates of severe cases because of us having a robust in-house program? The decision is, well, let's try the Norton district. They've got a strong support structure.
We don't really have the data to support that it's move-ins, that we're seeing higher numbers of. We are seeing higher numbers of children that weren't able to access early intervention or preschool or really any type of social setting outside of the home, and are lacking a lot of those skills and supports and structures that they would have otherwise received had the world not kind of shut down for a while.
Would it make sense to potentially offset with some kind of avoidance earlier, like development with Little Lancers or the Wheaton preschool, the local preschools, in terms of earlier intervention, so we can avoid the severe cases when it's developmentally harder to undo
Yeah,
the
that's what we're trying to do.
And that's absolutely our building back those kind of relationships, those programs, as Casey was saying, right now are understaffed. They can't find staff, which is not just with us, going to meet with our cohorts in other districts. They're running into the same thing, the same group of age students are experiencing, they're experiencing at those districts as well. So, I would like to say that our success actually has kept those out-of-district numbers down. I understand what you're saying, and I don't have data that says it is.
I don't have the data that it's not either.
Right, exactly. But I definitely think having the programs that we have keeps the number of students, because they're being successful, and parents and families want them here in town. And we have, great supports within the town, in the community that help us with those kids and help families, include them in their community, which is beneficial. But I would, again, definitely, the lack of early intervention that occurred over the last few years, whether it's preschool or early intervention services, has had an impact. But for some of our kids also that are older, they weren't able to get some of the services that they needed. Now they're
Transition support.
12, but they didn't get the services they really needed at 8 or 9, or their transition age, they're at high school at 21, 22, but those services weren't available to help them move forward. So there's
Hanging on to come with
a
kids
lot of
little
those
longer.
pieces were missing, and so now we're dealing with the aftermath of that and the lack of skills that were developed. And we're the ones trying to do it, because there's nobody else out there right
Because
now.
I think, what's important when we talk about early intervention, and I have an inside track because my wife is in that business, the kids you're seeing now identified as possible need of early intervention are the kids that were born during the shutdown. If you think back 3 years, because I believe it's 2-9 they're identified.
Correct.
And they make referrals and things like that. It comes from, the pediatrician or the preschool team. So, now we're starting to see kids that grew up differently. Their life started differently than the kids that are 3 years older than them. But the kids that are 3 years older didn't have the supports that they're seeing. So it's just this revolving cycle, and hopefully we can break that cycle with our quality teams in the next 3 to 5 years.
And to go back to the Medicaid conversation we were just having a minute ago about other costs that we're being reimbursed for, last year the town received $211,000 of Medicaid reimbursement on top of the circuit breaker that we already talked about. that does not come to the schools. That actually goes directly to the general fund.
Do you have a spreadsheet similar to this for children that are in district, that are one-to-one? I assume you have children that are one-to-one, one-to-one and a nurse maybe? Does that exist
Yeah,
as well?
We can
Yeah.
provide that.
So if there's, and on the same question, if there's one-to-one in the nurse, who's paying for the nurse? Is that Medicaid? Is that the insurance?
Now, when you say one-to-one for a nurse, you mean like they have a nurse following them?
I don't know, I'm
around?
asking if
Well,
there's,
so
if
we
they have
have
one
one-to-one-
teacher, one student, and then also, I hear that some of them have one teacher, one student, and a nurse, is that,
So.
I've heard
I
that
think-
term used from
Yes,
Joe
so we
previous.
have students that have one-to-one paraprofessional support, and we have a couple of students that have one-to-one nursing support for medical needs as well, but not,
And those
not
nurses are
both.
covered by medical insurance, I assume.
Outside of school hours, they are covered by medical insurance.
In
During
school?
During school hours, we pay
We
for
own
them.
it by law.
Can we get at least like a similar type spreadsheet and how
We
many,
certainly
Yeah,
can.
absolutely.
to have an understanding of those costs?
Yeah.
Sure.
Are y'all doing like regular assessments of, like, if there's a common denominator across like 10 kids, the cost differential of sending them out of district versus hiring and staffing for somebody? Because if you're paying $150,000 a kid, $1.5 million for 10 kids, you should easily be able to find staff for that, I would think.
Well, and you know, ultimately, that's why we have something else that we've been working on recently too. We went from 64 out-of-district placements, we're at 35 currently. We also have information on the number of programs that we had about 8 years ago in district. We had roughly 10 specialized classrooms 7 or 8 years ago, and now we have
32.
32. So we are creating programs. We are, you know, expanding them as students get older and maybe they are moving on to the L school or moving on to the middle school. So I know there is a conversation that we have a lot of space in our schools because of our enrollment decline in the last 20 years. We are full. We are full because we have made so many really high-quality, wonderful specialized programs for our students. The LGN is bursting at the seams. And it's crazy to say that when you look at a decrease in enrollment over time, but we are really at maximum capacity.
Now, how many students would you say would be using these 32 specialized classrooms?
That's a wonderful question,
Yeah.
and I have
Well,
actually
I'm
that
just
number
trying to,
at
like,
work. I
if you
have
had
that
to,
number
like,
in the
send
office. I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but.
Out of district, what would
Yeah.
that be costing?
So-
So I would say
So-
it's a ballpark about 100. It's about 25% of our special education number, which is at 568 currently. 568 students that are receiving special education
So
services.
this number would like triple.
At least, yeah.
Yes.
So it's about 3 to 5 kids per room, give or take.
Yeah, but I think
No,
it's
it's
growing,
actually-
actually. I think it's,
Actually,
That's
that
what
might
I'm saying,
not,
so it's probably-
that
I
might
think that's
actually
an
be.
underestimate.
I think 100 might be an underestimate when you put it that way, Nick,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
We have
We did
some
that.
that have, our ASD programs are about 6 to 8 per classroom, and there's
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
9 of them.
But
Nope,
for
10.
staff in those
Yeah.
classes is at least 3 staff members, all right?
Two
Typically.
Typically.
to 4, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
so average 3, yeah.
And obviously, as the students get older, typically, like the
We try-
one-to-ones, for example.
we try to
they
fade
come
those
down.
away.
We fade those out, or we add it, like, we do it as an additional staff within the program, but not necessarily a one-to-one for a student. But the other piece of this is that people have to understand is that both by best practice and by regulation, we need to include students as much as possible. So they may be in a specialized program. For example, at the LG, we have a program for students with emotional disabilities, K to 3. Those students also, by law, by regulation, have opportunities to be out in their
General
environment,
education.
general education, right? And that's part of what we do. So we need staff to be able to go and monitor them as they go along. There might be a couple that are not ready for that yet, so they're in the program, but then we need staff to be out there with them as well. So, you know, that's all included in the practice and the development. And eventually, the goal, just like bringing kids back from out of district, is to move kids from that kind of a program into an inclusion program or a regular ed.
With as little support as possible.
Yep.
So I guess the million-dollar
Skill
question
building.
is,
Yes.
if you had unlimited space, if space wasn't an issue, could some of these students, could you put a program in place in town to support some of these students locally? Or is there illness, or whatever you want to call it, too severe that you would,
I think
it would be?
I think that yes and no. So some of those students need to be in the settings that they're in right now.
Yeah.
I think there's other ones that we could theoretically, if we had unlimited space and staffing and quality staffing, we could definitely bring more back. But again, it's more of a,
And I think right now,
The training piece
I'm
is
sure
huge.
you've all heard
Yeah.
about the teacher shortage and the staffing shortage that is out there. So one of the issues that we're very lucky, but what we're running into is that.
Yeah, I just want to ask for clarification.
Yeah.
Because historically, we have done exactly what you're asking about,
Mhm.
but there has to be efficiencies. So when you say we can bring them back, you're saying we can bring them back cheaper than we're sending them out? Because that's an important
If we
part.
had
of this
I mean,
package.
short
we have the
term,
staff.
yes, I mean.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
if we had the staffing, we
Mhm.
could pay the staffing, and it would be efficient to bring them back, because that's the important
Yes.
part. So we have, historically, and Cody, you asked about it, right, we have done that in the past, where
Mhm.
I've had conversations with Dr. Byett, and he says, hey, you know, these three kids are kind of in a similar type of program, we can bring them back, and we can run that program here, and we do it.
Mhm.
So.
Right. It would,
just wanna
in some
make sure that
cases,
we're
it
all
might
on
not
the
make
same
sense in that situation because they would be a singleton, so that's one, not good for them. But then you might be in a situation where it's not cost effective. I personally don't try to make the decisions based on that. I try to do what's best for kids. But I wasn't saying, but I'm just, so I would say, yes, some of these students, we could, but then there are limits in a public school, and what we're able to do. And again, finding the appropriately well-trained staff, right now is a huge challenge, not just for us, but across the industry.
Because when you're spending this type of money, putting an addition on a school is small potatoes compared to the overall picture, if you can
Right.
get the staffing and, you know.
Well, I mean, I think we just saw that, was it last year or the year before, one of our collaboratives, you know, whacked us with a new bill because they outgrew their building.
Yeah.
So, and as part of that collaborative, there's an invoice for you, and we don't have control over that either. It's similar to when we send kids to other high schools that.
Southeastern.
Southeastern, Bristol Aggie.
The other one in Foxborough.
Charter.
They-
The state allowed a
Same.
14% increase to
Yeah.
private schools.
So-
And 10% to
There you go.
collaboratives.
It's just, I mean, and those other three high schools that we can send kids to, they don't have to come before you guys, they don't have to come before the selectmen, they just say, here's our bill, just, you know, net 90. You know, and that's what we're always up against. And we've done a great job, our administration has done a great job keeping kids here by having great programming. Our numbers are way down for, you know, the charter and the Aggie. They're up for Southeastern. I believe, don't quote me, I think we're second to Brockton in sending kids to Southeastern. because
Southeastern's a good
that's-
school.
I
It's a
agree.
great school.
So that was gonna be.
All three of my
right.
children applied, 2 of them got in, and one of them regrets not going.
That was gonna be my next question. Good segue here. So, if our high school isn't competitive, if we're having to cut our general education because of the increased cost in special education, what's that gonna look like if we have more and more kids going to Southeastern and other schools and we're getting slapped with their bills?
So one of the biggest concerns I have when we're cutting any sort of programming, like for example, the music conversations last year, world language at Norton Middle School, the biggest concern I have is how that is going to impact our school choice numbers. This year, we are bringing in roughly we have about 200 school choice students this year. And so for me, goes back to the ESSER conversation we had earlier about the fact that we're paying staff out of school choice. We will be crippled if something happens to that school choice revenue. Right now, we are using it for a large number of staff. Any new curriculum purchases that we've done over the last several years have come from school choice. Curriculum matters when we're teaching our students. We want to make sure that our teachers have appropriate research-based resources to use in their classrooms. Our technology, for the large majority of the last few years, has come from school choice and leases. So those are things that I get concerned about. We want to make sure that Norton is seen as a great place to learn, whether or not you live here. And I have heard, I'm a Mansfield resident, full disclosure, I've heard many things from my friends in Mansfield about how beautiful our schools are, how cool it is that we're doing X, Y, and Z, how jealous they are of our turf fields. Like, we're a very attractive school community right now, and it's really important for us to stay that way, because not only does it keep students in seats, it also brings students here to learn as well. You know what the number was?
1.404.
So that's the income for school choice this year.
And we have seen at least a couple of other districts in the area start to opt into school choice, so I don't think, I mean, we've been doing it for 10 years.
I was gonna say 9-ish.
Yeah, it might have been one of my first votes was school choice.
Yeah.
You know, so, but now we're seeing, that's why, to Jen's point, we're making our schools a better place, so you might not need to go down the road to get something that you could get here. You know, I think it's probably rare for someone to leave high school, you know, to go to school choice somewhere else, but it's that 8th grade, that's when we're always looking at those numbers, because it's a high school choice. At the middle school levels, you don't see a ton of school choice going out. It's just when it gets to that high school decision time, you know, having my youngest in high school now, it was a decision for all 3 of my children to make.
This year, our current freshman class, we only lost 28 students to other schools. That includes Southeastern, Bristol Aggie, Fian, Xaverian, all of the privates. So that's actually a very low number for us, which was exciting to see. We actually had a record number of students apply, but only 28 chose to leave.
Yeah.
28 total.
28 total.
The 8th grade, the current 9th grade.
Just the
class.
8th to the 9th?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So that's when we lose students typically.
There were other students that may have left in
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so I mean, we have, October 1st is our big enrollment data collection, because that's our numbers that we turn into the state, and that's how we get our funding. It all comes off of that October 1st number. So we will do that next Monday. Monday's October 2nd, and I will share that with you, Paula, so you can share that with your committee as well once that's done.
Dr. Neal,
Yes.
have we been able to avoid the Haitian refugee issue in Norton, like extended stay doesn't have any rooms booked by the state yet or anything?
Currently at the extended stay, they have 25 rooms that are booked by migrant families. Of those 25 rooms, only 3 of the children there are school-aged. We have 2 children that are kindergartners, they're twins, they're absolutely adorable. And then we have a student that is in 9th grade here at the high school. Oh, you
I just want to be clear, that school age that are coming to Norton. So we may have students there that go to, they had previously been in another district, and they are going to.
So that's different than the migrant families, right?
No.
No?
No, some of our,
Okay.
sorry, some of our migrant families have come in, maybe registered in Brockton, just for example, right? But then ended up being placed here in the extended stay. So they still have the option to go to Brockton. And that is something through the McKinney-Vento program, we would cost share that transportation with Brockton. Students that are enrolled in Norton are those 3.
Those 3,
And
yeah.
so those 25 rooms are full now, so you kind of know where you're at with the Haitian refugee issue? for now?
Yes. The other
So-
thing that's important to know, go ahead, Dinesh.
I was going to say, it just, an interesting thing about this, so we do get reimbursed or paid
Yes.
for them, and I think the number is 18,000.
So it depends on how much time the students are here. It's actually $104 per student per day. So if they were to be here for the entire 180 days, it's roughly $18,000.
Yes, and I don't know if there are specialized programs that cost us more, but the irony of this is that's actually more than we spend on a per student basis.
And
So,
3 times as much as we get reimbursed for school choice.
and yes.
That's the issue with school choice,
More than 3
from a budgeting standpoint. You have 200 kids in schools. We have to do it for the $1.4 million to keep us going, if you will. The issue is we're getting $5,000 from that kid from Mansfield. We're getting $5,000 from Attleboro. We're spending $16,000 per student. So we're making up the $11,000 somewhere along the line to make sure we're giving them a good quality Norton education, you know? And that's the issue that school choice, all these numbers are going through the roof. School choice has been the same for the last 20 years of $5,000, you know? And again, our hands are tied because it's a state mandate and that's what they do, you know? If those numbers went up, now that money starts pouring in, now it's saying, hey, we got some offsetting money to do X, Y, and Z with.
But again, you know, one thing I have not heard from anybody in the time I've been on the finance committee is, you know, we get 1.4 million in school choice. Well, what if we didn't have these 200 students? How many teachers would be laid off? What is the net? What is the net? And nobody has come up with that number.
No, and we've talked about actually going through this. So the thing is, right, like when they come in, I mean, if a student comes in and it's not just simply, okay, whatever our number is, 16,000, it doesn't cost us 16,000 to educate that kid, right?
On average, it
Because-
does, though.
No, it doesn't. What I'm saying is.
Well, the lights are gonna be fixed.
There's a
They're
mar-
fixed expenses.
there's a marginal kid comes in and says, okay, and I don't mean marginal, he's marginal, it's a marginal addition to us. So, kid comes in, lights are already on, we're already heating the building, the teacher's already paid for in that classroom, we already own the furniture, we've already got the books, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, the fixed costs are already in place. It's what's the variable cost, right? And the variable cost is not $5,000. So it is profitable to bring the kid in. Now, your question is, and I hate to be like gauche about it, to call kids profitable, but it is what it is, right? So your question is really, okay, but are we incurring an additional teacher to educate those children, et cetera? And that's the conversation we've kind of had is, okay, well, let's go through and let's see in grade by grade, if we took out those kids, could we drop a teacher, basically? So we're having that conversation you're asking us about right now.
But that's also a moving target because the mix changes.
Right.
It does,
and,
right,
you know,
and that's why it's not a simple, oh, we can just look and say yes, because the kids are constantly moving, kids are coming, you know, more kids are coming in, like it's.
So how is that, like, next year's enrollment? Do you say I can only take 10th, 8th graders, 5? How does that work?
Yes, we can certainly do that. So.
Is that what we've done, or we can do that?
We have done both. So
Okay.
in the past, the school committee has voted on specific numbers. We will only accept 5 students in first grade, or, 5 students K to 5. We will accept up to 10 students at the middle school. We currently do not accept anyone after 10th grade. We are closed for 11th and 12th unless it's a sibling or something like that. And then we've had other years, we've voted and kept it kind of open. It really depends on our own internal enrollment. Back to your question, right now in kindergarten at JCS, we have 7 school choice students. So 5 classrooms, it's 1 or 2 kids per room, so that wouldn't be a huge difference, right? When you look at the middle school numbers, those are a little bit different. We have 23 8th graders. Again, at the middle school, as most of you know, we have the team approach. They're divided amongst 2 teams, 4 classrooms on a team. So again, it's not, I don't know if you'd be able to cut a staff member with those numbers, but it's definitely something that I know the school committee has been talking about and we will continue to look at as well.
When do you make that decision about how many school choice in the spring?
The vote has to happen before June 1st.
Okay, but then potentially you get kids moving in the summer, so you think
Yes.
you're at capacity with the school choice and then maybe you're over capacity possibly,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I don't think we've ever run into a scenario where like, well, it's different if they're moving into town, that's a little different scenario, but, I mean, we could get an occasional, over the summer, we would empower the superintendent to make that decision. I mean, if something, for example, that sticks out, Brockton had a huge shortage in their finances, it was newsworthy.
That's the understatement of the day.
If 40 kids from Brockton wanted to come in school choice and they were all in like grade 1 or 2 or 3, then that's a separate conversation to have. If you look at it, just as Jen said, if you look at it, 24 kids in 1 grade, you're spread out over 6 or 7 classes, it's an extra kid here and there, and we do look at our class limits, so, we do have the limits for that reason at the lower age, the lower classes, so, we're not gonna take 20 school choice kids in kindergarten and hire more staff, because we're not gonna tie it to it. But I think up until, I would say, 4 years ago, we stayed away from staffing payments with school choice. We always wanted it for.
Yeah, it was more than 4 years ago, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we tried to for a
In the
long,
grand
long
scheme of it, I mean,
Yeah.
when we hit the wall probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. But if we look at it from the other perspective, is those 200 kids are bringing in $1.4 million, that's our tech, that's a lot of it was our technology, and I mean, thankfully, and hopefully we never have to go through what we did 3 years ago with the technology, but thinking about it, that would have been crippling for school districts that didn't have that money or that technological ability that we had, where kids had devices. Like Taunton, you had to pull up and they gave you a packet of work at school every week. Oh, here's your paper. So I mean, we've used it efficiently in that, we're not trying to tie it to salaries. There was a push, probably 6 years ago, we called out the superintendent, well, if you want to have school choice, tie your salary to it. That way it's going to be a program that superintendent was going to want to absolutely make sure we're being efficient. So we've done a good job that those 200 kids help the 2,500 other kids by choosing to come here. And I don't know the number offhand, but I think a lot of that is staff. So the staff that we have here believes in this district so much that they want to bring their kids here. And years ago, you didn't have that option. I mean, if you're a teacher and your kid gets sick, like every other parent, you want to go running to them, and that could be an hour away. Now so it's a convenience for some of our staff that they can just drive a mile each way, and their kid can be comforted by their parent too.
So, and I've said 100 times, and Joe Bad heard me say it, and Jen's heard me say it a million times, money's fungible, right? So it doesn't really matter. Like, the fact that we're using school choice money for a salary or a kickball in the gym or whatever, it doesn't matter. Our budget's our budget. We have this much revenue. We have to find.
It all goes in one pot.
It's fine.
How do you want to divide it up?
Right, the money's fungible. So kind of getting beyond that. Full disclosure, because one of your questions, I want to make sure that that's interpreted the right way. Once we bring in a school choice child, we own them. So we can't retroset that number down. So in other words, if we have 10 kids in the 8th grade in school choice right now, next year we can't say we're only taking 8 in the 9th grade. We can't, once they're here for the life of their education unless they choose to leave. So there's that. And then I just wanted to address one other thing. The 8th grade, we had 28 students. 28 students. So you say, wow, that's a classroom. But it gets complicated because the middle school is a pod educational system with the purple and the white, and they each have social studies, math, English. You can't get rid of one English teacher on one side. It gets complicated. So it's, again, kind of to bring it back to what I originally said, we're looking at it and we understand that it's some fuzzy math, and you want to be conscious of it. But I think it's fair to say that if we lost the however many students and the 1.4 million, I think the 1.4 million would be the problem, not the losing the students.
So, piggyback on what you just said, you have a student that you brought in and you own them. So that student that you brought in from Taunton, Easton, wherever, now develops an issue and he winds up on this list.
District-based, their district-based, not us.
Their district pays for it? 100% of it?
Yeah, I think
completely off?
I think Casey
Yeah.
answered that question earlier,
Okay.
that we actually have that situation this year.
What about if they need an IEP in-house that's handled? Then we pay for
I
that?
don't want to speak for that, but just generally, yeah, generally, we get whatever the cost is above the 5,000, they have to reimburse.
So we get reimbursed for services that the students receive here. So it wouldn't be the flat 5,000, maybe they have speech and language, there's a different formula that goes into that, they're in an inclusion classroom, a different formula goes into that, and it comes off of the reimbursement.
You have an incredibly complicated funding
We have been telling you that for a long time. Yes, it is extremely complicated. It's, as I've said to this team here, Dr. Bayetta did an incredible job over the years explaining the finances and really being able to roll with it off the cuff. And I've been, working with Christine, and we're a great team. And it's definitely different sitting in this seat and having to share this information with you. I know it's overwhelming. I hope that our answers for you tonight help give you a little bit more of an understanding about the challenges that we're facing here. And we're happy to answer other questions, but I do want to reiterate that if anyone ever wants to come in and walk a building with me or with one of our admin team, they're your schools. We would love to invite you in and show you the great work that we're doing every day.
Back to your point, Dinesh, on having a pot of money, you know what the incoming is. I guess my concern on the fiscal side is how much do we know is ending this year, like grants? Like how much of that money that you have in the coffers this year is not going to be there because they're not being replaced with new grants, or you have no certainty around that? Like how much is that total that we know is not accounted for? We can estimate every year 200 kids in school choice is going to be 1.4 million. You can just keep that in the budget on average every year. You can project that. But for the grants, how much are we projecting like this money will end next year?
So we can tell you with confidence the $592,000 from ESSER 3 will not be there next year. This is the last year we are able to use that funding, and that is all we have left of that funding. So that we can tell you with certainty will not be there. The other entitlement grants that we're showing you in that yellow section, the 3 down the bottom, as we discussed, are not for staff or programming. They might be back, they might not. But the others are typically there, and the amounts tend to ebb and flow year by year. Those are all based on student enrollment, the level of need in our community. So they look at the number of students that may be eligible in terms of economically disadvantaged. They look at students that are considered high needs, and all of that goes into the formula. So if our data ebbs and flows as a community in terms of our low-income population, our special education population, the number of families that are considered high needs, that can fluctuate. But those grants should be there again.
And most grants are earmarked, right? Like you get a grant for something, it's got to go directly to that. It's not like an open-ended, like the ESSR 3, like that.
That was a little
That's
bit
kind of a
open-ended,
general,
yes.
right, that's an open-ended thing because
Yes.
you were able to fund staff
Yep.
with it.
Everything else is very prescriptive.
So we're looking at like 750,000. We were short how much this year, where you had to scramble to figure out how to backfill and save
It was
positions and stuff like
1.6
that.
initially, correct?
So we'll be 1.6 plus 750 short next year, plus whatever special ed requirements go up. Like we're looking at 2.3, 2.4 short on the same budgetary basis from this year.
And I think also what's important is we use more school choice money than ever to offset our budget. So we used almost 2.4, it was 2.35. And we usually carry over around $1 million. We're probably not going to end that way. We always want to leave some to help carry over because we get it monthly, so we can't pay for things. So we have to schedule everything out. So same with the circuit breaker funds. Like if we end up getting 1.5 or maybe even a little more because we get more reimbursed for transportation, then if we get more move-ins, then the amount that we're going to carry over is much less. And then that's another hit.
You don't have like, for the town, it's free cash. You've got some equivalent of that built into the budget and you won't have that.
Exactly.
Because it's being spent.
Right.
Yep.
And so Christine mentioned that we had the backup plan, I don't even know what you called it, I apologize, and it was like $100,000 for private placement and $75,000 for a collaborative. And that was it. That was our reserve, the $175,000, and as you've seen tonight, it's gone. So, we don't have the bigger reserves that even the schools have had in the past. We were able to put more money aside previously.
So all the school choice will be specs, I think it's usually like 800,000, right, carry over?
It depends, right? It depends on how much
Yeah.
we need.
It's what that final budget looks like when it comes, because every year Dinesh votes against using it for positions. And
It's ceremonial now.
It's
literally
Shouldn't even ask,
4
you
to
just
1
write
every
for
time.
it. But it's
principle.
So, but at some point, we're still talking, we're talking about keeping the lights on, we're keeping staff in schools, and I think it comes down to what's the best for the 2,600 kids. And if we have that 200,000, then, we have to creatively use it. It's not an open checkbook by any means. And I think the one thing, with the ESSER 3, there could be other grants available, but we we don't know what that's gonna be. You know, especially, you know, the federal government does everything, you know. So we don't know.
So
They could have
How
some
quick
other
is that
grant.
cliff coming, where, like, you're funding with non-recurring?
Well, so let me suggest this, and I'm thinking on the fly here. So the question about what monies we're confident we're not going to get back, I think we want to expand past that, and I'm sure we probably don't have this now, but I think we maybe want to give you guys the number of, okay, what grants are we not getting? But X out of that,
What other ones?
programs we can simply just cut. In other words, like, if there's like an operational program that we need to kind of keep going, okay, then that grant is an actual budgetary loss. But if there's something where we say, well, we'll just cut that program, like X those out, because I think that's probably more what you're looking for is, okay, how high is the cliff? Is it 5 stories or is it 50 stories, right? And I think that's what Cody's really looking to get is so maybe give them both of those numbers. Here's what we're losing in grants, and the money we're sure is not coming back. And here's that X, the programs
Right,
that
so what we're
were funded by a
currently
grant
paying
that we'll just simply cut the program. Yeah.
And I think, you know, Dinesh and Dan.
I'm not being cavalier with the
No.
programs, I know they're all important.
No,
but
and then I
it's-
think it's good to say, okay, we could potentially do this and do that. We had been talking about the cliff pre-COVID. And saying it's coming next year, it's coming next year, it's coming next year. And then, you know, everyone was kind of flush with income because of all of the federal grant money. And I say that like kind of cavalierly, like
Yeah,
flush with it.
COVID saved us a
right?
little
I mean,
bit.
COVID saved us. It really, truly did. With the ESSER money that we received, we were able to maintain for a few years. And we never saw it coming. So, you know, unfortunately, we did kick the can down the road a little bit because of, you know, we were able to get by with those ESSER funds. I don't see anything else that's coming to save the day.
Is there any,
Not to that magnitude.
is there any talk about tying school choice rates to something like inflation? It sounds like it hasn't moved in a decade.
There's talk here.
I mean.
There's
it's-
talk at the bottom, not at the top. The
That's what I
top
was
is blind.
wondering, if there's any momentum there at all.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of complications there. So my guess is, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but my guess is that you get a lot of larger voting blocks that are sending communities to smaller voting blocks. And so the appetite at the state level to change that number to a higher number is not as robust as the appetite is here to do that. And I'm trying to be really nice about how I'm saying that, but that's just the reality.
I think to
right?
simplify it a little bit, like, if you're a town that sends 50 kids out at $5,000, and then now you're sending 50 kids at $10,000, you're gonna wanna vote against that. You're not gonna want your state reps to support it. Whereas ours would absolutely support it, because we tout, every time we see our state reps, we talk about the good things we do. And we've had those discussions. We have, you know, we've asked them, but it's not gonna get a lot of love from the sending districts.
The simple solution is, where do you want your money as a taxpayer? Do you want it following students, or do you want it funding a system? That's simple. That's what school choice is.
Chief.
So, I see Wade sitting over there comfortably.
I'm sure they're all thrilled that I asked them to be here tonight.
Yes, the school buildings in the district, great shape, major needs coming up or anything, Wade, that you foresee that's a big ticket item that we're gonna be worried about, or?
The Yell and the LGN roof will be up shortly. We'll try to do that through an MSBA project. MSBA is on hold right now because they fell so far behind with the lack of years. And the funding has shot up so much that they kind of fell behind as well. So those are probably our next big ticket items. Other than that, the schools are in really good shape. I'm very proud of what they look like. And I think you heard earlier, Dr. O'Neill mentioned, you know, we're keeping kids here because of our facilities and our grounds. I mean, I think that's a huge accomplishment to my team. It does a great job taking care of our buildings. And our buildings are not new anymore.
No.
The new middle school saying it is not the new middle school. It's a 1998 building. It's 25 years old. And, you know, we've done a great job keeping that up. This is a 2013 building, and I think it looks as good today as it did, you know, when we did the renovation on it. So I'm very proud of where we are with buildings. But those are the next two big ticket items will be the roofs on the Yell and the LGN.
We actually do have a big ticket item for capital improvement related to the middle school. That's going to be, might be in your old area of expertise. It's that fire alarm system and panel.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been presented already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the only.
We'll be voting on that next week.
Thank you.
Wade, there was one other question I forgot to send to you guys. Cody actually asked, what are you seeing in the fees maybe that we're collecting with the athletic fields, renting them out? Are we seeing?
So we started renting the fields out, I think it was late February, early March. I'll let Christine confirm this, but I think we probably rented out about $70,000 worth of rentals so far to third-party rentals, not charging our local organizations, our Norton Youth, baseball, soccer, they've all been on there, we don't charge them. There's no fee at all. So these are all third-party rentals, and I think we probably.
I know it was 40,000 between when we began and June 30th. So, when we started end of February, beginning of March, it was $40,000 there. I don't know what we've brought in since July 1.
They're
And that
adding
money
fees
goes
for
directly to
nights and stuff, for
maintenance,
lights if they want to do that and stuff or not?
Absolutely,
Or
yeah, that was all,
okay.
it's $175 an hour for a third party and $195 once we turn the lights on an hour. And I think from what we hear, that's a low price, and we've had no issue selling our fields out. They're used all the time, if not by our school kids and our high school teams, our rec programs, and then third party. So it's definitely, for us, it's been a lot of work, but I think it's paying off. And I think if you speak to anybody in town on the weekends, the businesses in town should also be seeing a hit. I'm sure the donut shops and the convenience stores and the restaurants are all seeing some more business as well, from people coming to town from all over the place.
Now that funding from the rentals goes directly back into an account to maintain the fields, correct?
Right.
It's going into the athletic complex fund, which that's what we use to pay out if we need anything on it, and/or that'd be for future upkeep for the turf replacement 12 to 15 years down the road.
So is that fund here on this list, is athletic?
It's within the facilities account, it's a subsidiary account within the facilities.
Facilities?
So there's one here that's for 81,000, that's on your list of grants and revolving funds, is that fund or not?
It's the second from the top.
Yes. So facility revolving, it says beginning balance 216,902
Yep.
with the receipts of 81,137. It's included in that.
Yep.
So it's a separate
Okay.
line within that account.
And just one last question for me. On this sheet on the transfers, I'm trying to understand, how often do these transfers happen? Is it monthly, year-end only? And this is kind of moving from, it looks like revolving accounts to something else. So charges, just curious what those charges are. But the second part of that is, with you guys as a bottom line budget, are transfers made from one operating account to another within the budget? Now, used to say postage goes to salaries at some point. Does that ever happen?
Those type of transfers, the larger ones, rarely happen. I'd say once or twice a year.
So, but really and not, so just postage could go to
Those
salaries?
ones, but we rarely do expenses, if ever, to salaries.
Okay, but all right, let's postage to athletic fees, or athletic fees to postage, that can happen. And where do we see that type of transfer for an education purpose for our team?
So we rarely do transfers from different funds. So that one is from the revolving funds back into the budget. But we only did that once last year, I believe, once or twice. I think that's the only one though. And the smaller accounts within the budget, within this sheet, we only do very small budget changes that are in between small, like a travel account with a postage account or something like that. But we don't do between expenses and payroll accounts unless it's absolutely needed. And I think we maybe did that once last year.
So where would our team get educated on those type of transfers? How much, how often? Our ask was normally to get, I'll call it budgets versus actual,
Yep.
monthly, with their revenue or the special accounts that they have, revolving accounts, balances, with transfers on a regular basis. That's something that's kind of fallen through the cracks, I think, with transitions.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great education tool, so we understand. And I'm thinking with the budget process for athletic fees or athletic complex, no more grass seed, no more all that fixing, okay? That probably is in year one budget, maybe it gets moved later on. Year two, it's gone. We just want to understand how
Where
that
it
works.
goes.
I see what you're asking,
Right.
okay. I see what you're asking.
Clear?
Yeah, so you're basically asking things that, you don't care so much about postage as you do, like, okay, if a line item, disappears essentially, like, where does it move to, like?
Postage is
You've-
probably a bad example, but it's moving
Yeah, no,
funds
yeah,
from one
yeah,
account to another. Just-
we cleared out some line item expense, like, okay, in your budget, where does that now go to? Because we don't necessarily say, oh, we took 30,000 out and we're just 30,000 less.
Right.
We moved that somewhere else. I see what you're saying.
Or unforeseen circumstances in one account, you need to buffer from another where you had some
Yeah.
leverage. And I know, for example, salaries, when you were talking about salaries, you're budgeting high, somebody leaves, you're budgeting back somebody else, it's a little lower salary, a little flux right there.
Yeah.
How is that used, that kind
Mhm.
of, okay,
We can
Yeah.
give you all some more information about that. Absolutely.
thank you.
Are you also, for the out-of-district, are you budgeting ahead that it's going to get worse with the COVID babies and COVID toddlers that got taken out of that? I mean, are you projecting into the budget that we got 35 now, but we got 50 kindergartners starting next year or something that haven't been socialized properly and don't know how to act and are going to choke each other and punch each other in the face more than usual? That's not an exaggeration. Are you accounting? Are you accounting?
What's going on at that? How's that, guys?
That's always going on. Are you accounting for like the projections that this will get worse before it gets better, and 35 next year could easily be 45?
One of the best things that we have here in Norton is our Little Lancers program, because working with Little Lancers in early intervention, we're able to identify the students that really are in need of that preschool support and may have significant needs, may have an IEP, may have a diagnosis at a young age. And they are brought into our preschool system here and educated within our public schools. So our team at JCS does an incredible job of working with local area preschools, working with early intervention to identify those students. So every once in a while, we get a surprise when a student comes into kindergarten or first grade, but it's not as often as you would imagine. Instead, we see a student coming up, we see them a few months before they begin at preschool, and can kind of have a better idea of what their needs are. Vinny and Casey were both talking earlier tonight about the BEST program at the LGN, which is for students that are on the autism spectrum, and how that population has really grown in the last few years. We're seeing that even in our preschool population and in the needs of our preschoolers. We used to have one preschool classroom for students that had really significant needs, and now we have two. And so that is definitely growing, and it's, for us, we're able to say, okay, we're starting with this student at 3, and what is this going to look like as a student gets older and grows? And occasionally, I think we've always had a bigger buffer. Those reserves that we talked about tonight, I don't think they've ever really been that low. I'm going to share secrets for just a second here. I remember when we had a networking line, that was, where we would keep our reserves, because no one ever looked at it. And so, right, as I said, share secrets.
I know what you're talking about.
But, I mean, that was, many business managers ago. Christina's been the 4th business manager I've worked with since coming to central office. So we don't have the flexibility in our budget anymore to create that bigger reserve that we really do need in order to make those predictions. And so when you have to make a choice between, I need this teacher in this classroom now, versus I think perhaps this might happen down the road, we're going to use the funding that we're given to put the teacher in the classroom now. And so I don't want anyone to think that we're ill-prepared, but the reality of what we're given as our budget and what our needs are, we don't have the flexibility to create those reserves.
And do we have a, I know you keep a separate tab running of the special ed versus general, and special ed is mandatory. Dr. Byetta was very clear about all that. That continues to grow. Everything continues to grow, but special ed you can't pull from. It is what it is, which means when that goes up, general's got to drop, because we're not increasing the budget, we're not increasing taxes, we're not doing an override. You know, all those conversations are completely separate. You have a set budget. Special education keeps going up, which it sounds like it's going to continue to go up, but we get more and more kids on the spectrum and with special needs. So as that continues going up, special ed is going to become a larger proportion of your overall spending, which means you have to cut general ed. And of the 2,500 kids you've got, 500 are getting half the budget, and the other 2,000 are getting whatever's left.
So I believe and it's, last year the special education budget was roughly a third of our total budget. And I know Dr. Byetta and the school committee have always talked about mandated education in terms of educating our students with special education needs, IEPs, our English language learners. I personally believe we are morally and ethically mandated to provide every single child that walks into our schools with a quality education. And so the fact that we are taking from the other student population to provide for a subset of our students, to me is not okay. I was the teaching and learning person for 12 years. You guys know that has always been my background, and I've been saying this for a long time. We have to educate every single child that comes in. We need to prepare them for life after Norton, whatever that means for them. And so to cut general education in order to provide services, there has to be another way.
So, to wrap this up, because I know it's past Cody's bedtime.
He's got to go home and get hit.
Referee. It's not happening at home, it's happening at school.
So going into the next school year, you've depleted your reserves. To get through this year, we transferred roughly $750,000 from stabilization. That accounts down to about $2 million. You're going to lose the ESSA funds, another
562.
So right off the bat, you're $1.3 million, $1.4 million in the hole before any increases. So at what point, I don't want to get to the point of, a week before town meeting or 2 days before the end of school, before the residents start raising their hands and saying, what's going on here? At what point do you think, and I know your school just started and you guys are getting your feet wet, I got all that. We can level with the people in Norton to say, okay, this is what our next school year is looking at. Is it January, is it February, is it March? What is the plan? Because it's obvious there's gonna be a hole. I just don't know. And the cliffs happened every year. It happened last year. If you didn't transfer money from stabilization, you would have had a bunch, you would have had to come up with another $750,000 someplace, which
Yes,
you would have had layoffs.
And we appreciated
Yeah,
that, and that
it's-
was, got us through another year.
But that's just Band-Aids and duct tape. So, so I guess, when do you guys think you'll have some numbers to share with the public of what the next fiscal year is gonna look like?
Will you have
So everybody
by
can start
next
planning
joint
accordingly.
meeting?
Next joint meeting, I believe, is
November, but you're not gonna have next year's numbers
That's
by
why I
then.
was hoping to get ahead of it. And have us all have the discussion prior to the start of our.
Well, I mean, I think we would, I don't want to speak for the, we probably know what our fixed costs are going to be, like contractual obligations. We would probably, we could probably draw those up in a couple of days. But it's the variable costs that, as we've discussed here tonight, it's next to impossible for us to project, like, really to next year. Because, we look at these numbers, we have our October 1st number for enrollment. Well, after October 1st, we could get another kid going to Boston, and it just is what it is. But I would say the variable costs are really gonna be the unknown, but, if you have size 11 shoes, 5 inches of those shoes are already on the cliff. So the cliff is here. It's just we're backing it up an inch or two every year. And I think we've been pretty lean with our staffing. We're not like other districts that have extra staffing. We don't have a great tax base still. You know, the industrial park is what it is. These are all factors that, they're all great for the town of Norton, but they all could be 2, 3, 4 years away before we see an impact into the budget overall. Hopefully, the last 5 inches of the cliff haven't collapsed by then for us. It's just, that there's too many variables to project out, and we like to project out. I mean, I know Dinesh, me and him have had this conversation, like, what does year 2 and 3 and 4 look like? We don't really know. I mean, the only thing we really know is how much our contracts are settled at for that amount of time.
All I'm saying is, you know, the earlier we can communicate it to the public,
I
the
think
better.
I think you can probably guess on the variables. You know, I hate to say that, but, because the variables
Estimate
probably
is the
aren't
better
that
word.
variable, right? Like, I mean, you
That's
know
right.
you're gonna have
Guesstimate.
approximately so many kids.
Yeah.
You can kind of guess, I guess. But the danger is, and I think, you know, this is why Dan's saying this, is like, if, like, listen, we already jumped off the cliff, right? We jumped off the cliff and
We're clinging to the rocks.
and we found a parachute, and we pulled the parachute, and then the parachute caught fire. And then we pulled the parachute. And, you know, this is what's happening. We're like, we're falling, and we keep finding ways to, like, slow the fall. So, what I don't want to do is, I don't want to come back to you and say, hey, listen, the hole is going to be 1.6 million, and then it turns out it's 700,000, you know, because something happens. Because honestly, then it starts to erode our credibility, I think. And I don't want to get into that situation. However, that being said, I think we can certainly give you contractual stuff and our best guess on variable stuff so that there's a sense of it. But I don't want that then to become kind of the public conversation, because we can get,
It's gonna
I
be
mean,
in
if
parentheses.
we held variables flat, which we know that's not typically going to happen.
That's
but if
the
you-
variable.
Yeah, but if you hold it flat, and then you know the fixed costs that are going to increase, then we already know, we started at 2.3, it was 1.6, we got 700 from stabilization to offset, like, but we knew we were starting at 1.6. It was really, it was 1.6
I think if
after the 700.
I think if you
And
took
now
your
you're
variables
gonna-
and said up 3%, that's probably realistic.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
it's probably gonna be more like 4 to 5, but 3% of the variables is a decent COLA, I think.
If and when the state changes the special ed mandated, you know, increase again, when do you find that out?
Typically-
Is it like is it
You know,
a
we
set
said the
time
day
every
before
year,
the school
or is it
starts.
just, surprise?
Typically, we don't know our reimbursement rates until very late in the spring. So typically after town meeting and all those things have occurred.
And like the state budget that we used to get $30 per student, we just learned that we're getting a little bit more.
We got 60.
So like, and we just got that, when, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, and it was, yeah, it
So
was.
4 months into our budget, we get
Yeah.
a little bit.
But that's 60 because we're classified as an able to pay
Yes.
school district
Correct.
because our tax rate
What
is
does
not
Lawrence
as
get?
high as
Never
our
gonna change.
Lawrence
counterparts.
gets like
and-
2,600.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you
So-
should see the,
Avon got like
Are there
700.
conversations between your administration and the state saying,
Yes.
what level do, like, we're able to pay until what level? Like, what does our tax rate need to be for us to get more money back from the state beyond like, if we raised our tax rate, what are we at, 14 cents? If we raised it to 15 cents or 16 cents, like, if we did that, would we get more back from the state? And would that offset the
No,
over?
I
No.
don't
It
think
goes on- it goes on the
so. So I
inside.
think you're sorely overestimating the state. So I think what they're saying when they say you're an ability to pay is, they're saying you pay. They're not saying, hey, you should pay more and then we'll give you more. They're saying, you guys need to tax more. That's quite frankly what they're saying. is your town's ability to pay more for schools, police, fire, et cetera, is there, and you're not tapping that. And so we're not going to give you that money because you can pay
Right,
yourself.
and that's what I'm, like, the point I'm making there is, we have the ability to do that. Is there
There is not an increase,
threshold
no.
where they say,
No, they don't.
okay, now
We
you're
are very,
at this
very, very
threshold,
far
you
from
get.
it.
okay.
Yes, yes.
I actually met with Senator Feeney yesterday as well. And we talked a lot about, you know, the different issues, and, things that we have going on here in Norton. And I think, perhaps a school committee member and a FinCom member and maybe a select board member and, talking with him and showing, that community perspective of the challenges that we have. I talked with him about the Medicaid reimbursement, how we really need to see more support in terms of, the students' needs and how they're being paid. And we talked about master planning as a community as well. So we put together a strategic plan. We know what our goals are for the next 3 to 5 years. And, we work really hard to get to that point. And so that makes it, but it makes it difficult when you don't have the funding for it. So I would welcome the opportunity to have those conversations as a larger community as well.
Is it appropriate to invite them to the joint meeting next month?
We could certainly ask if they're able to attend.
I think one other thing too, I know I mentioned the industrial park, but, another impact we can see is, we have new housing on Pine Street, the new apartment complex. Those are those things that we can't project. We had an idea when they built East Main. I think we underestimated how many kids were there. So those are these factors that we don't account for in next year's budget, but 2 or 3 years from now, those apartments could be more affordable, and then you could have 60 kids move in, and it's just.
So that's 101 units, the new apartment complex near the Old Roach Plaza. So
Are they 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom? Do we know?
I believe they're a combination of both, so we don't know what to expect there. And then 43 homes off of Pine Street in the cluster housing. So those are family homes, 2 to 3 bedrooms. And then there's another additional 6 houses on Pine Street that are being built currently. And those numbers I got from Mike Units earlier this week.
And those would
Plus
go
5
to
on
LG,
G.
right?
Yes,
Yeah,
so
501.
Pine Street is LG, as we talked about, they're
Yeah.
kind of busted at the seams.
And a
over
bunch
there
on
right now.
Barrow Street too that are being built.
Yeah, so Barrows is JCS, and then the apartment complex is also JCS.
The conversation about.
Across Pine Street too, after that, for another 40-something.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
the second phase.
So the conversation about the state level and reimbursements and additional funding, and no better group to talk to about this than you guys. I think it's important to remember, just like when we do our budget, anything additional they give to us, they're gonna pull from somewhere else. And that's just the reality. And I know, or I'd like to think that you guys would all love to fund the schools to the absolute maximum, et cetera, but that's just not reality, right? That's not the world we live in, unfortunately. Money is finite, and that's that. And I think the state is under that same, and you'll never hear me defend the state again other than right now, but I think that is like, they're under that same handcuffing that we are, if you will.
But they have a
So-
huge surplus. Huge, 25 billion or something?
Yeah, but there's a lot of people in line for any surplus, right? And that's just the reality. And so kind of back into the, the circuit breakers, et cetera, and who is it that's getting 2,600 warrants, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
the people who are gonna get that additional funding are not gonna be the small town Nortons. It's gonna be the large cities. It's just the reality of voting.
The large voting cities.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, I'd love to sit here and rally against the injustice, but it's not gonna change at the end of the day. So, it's a great poster, but what's the point?
I think the important thing to think about too, when we think about the state surplus, they also had a lot of money in federal grants for COVID relief. So I think we're going to see some of that money dry up a little bit in the next year or two as well.
I remember Joe mentioning in the spring, I don't know if it was at a school committee meeting, maybe the budget one that he did, the millionaires tax, there was conversations about us possibly getting money.
We're not gonna see anybody.
Uh-huh.
That was
They'll probably
don't
find
get
a
me
way.
started.
Not at this time. There is no money for
Sounds like I'm gonna vote for
K-12
it.
education
Right,
at this
it's-
time.
exactly.
There is money that's going to higher ed, and there's also money that is going to early childhood. But as of right now, there is no funding for K-12.
So I mean, we could expand Little Lancers to full-day program.
If you can find me the space,
saying,
you let me
like,
know.
under that.
I know of a town hall that's about to be empty.
Yeah, I don't know if my kids there.
Asbestos and all that.
Yeah, the gym converted to a meeting room,
Yeah,
converted
there
to a
you go.
preschool.
There you
Yeah,
go.
right, exactly.
Perfect.
It's on its 5th life.
Well, we'll probably know it won't be torn down, so it'll still be there in some capacity.
Well, if we have discipline programs, it's got that jail in the basement, right?
There you
go.
If we can't suspend kids, I'm pretty sure we can't put them in jail.
I think we sold those.
The Norton Scared Straight program.
Does anyone else have any other questions for the school committee or for Dr. O'Neill?
Yeah, just a quick question. I know last year, this time, Dr. Byetta was saying that they had the highest number of teachers leave in the district. How did our numbers look this year in terms of teachers not returning?
So we did have a number of resignations this year. Couple, a few different reasons. Some people, found jobs that were closer to home. Some people had families that were transferred. Some, went on to different careers. So resignations, we had, I'd say roughly 25, and that is across all units, not just teachers. So paraprofessionals, crossing guards, custodians, all of that. So it's about 25. And a few of them there are working closer to home. A few are maternity leaves that decided after they took their leave of absence that they were going to stay home and raise their families. So that's roughly where we are right now.
In all of those positions, no problem filling them? I know we were talking about teacher shortage earlier.
Some of them, for example, there was an English teacher that resigned at the high school. We did not refill that position. So when we talk about, there were 4 actual layoffs, there were other positions that we did not refill, and that was one of them.
Do you know how many that weren't filled?
I believe when we finally counted, it was roughly a dozen in the spring, but we brought back the music teacher, so I would say probably maybe 10 total, including the layoffs.
Do you want to send them a copy of this?
Yeah, I can send you the copy of our
We
staff
have this
changes.
at our meeting tonight, so.
Okay.
If you'd like to see that. And I also shared with the committee our Years of Service Awards. We recognize staff for their dedication to Norton on the first day of school. And anyone that has worked 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, and so on is recognized. And we had over 610 years of service to Norton that was recognized on the first day of school. So I'll share that with you as well, which to me, I think that's something to really celebrate.
Do you have a sense for the positions that were, the resignations where you didn't backfill, what the impact was to the kids? So like not having an English teacher in high school, how many other English teachers are there? Did the class size impact?
Yeah, so it was definitely a class size impact. We went from 9 English teachers down to 8. And, Mr. Cersey runs the schedule. It means, number one, higher class sizes, and it also means that we're able to offer fewer electives in that content area. I'm going to look really quickly at the other. Bless you.
Sorry.
No worries. Other things were filled. We also had a few other staff, we didn't refill a math position here. Same thing. So higher class sizes, fewer electives.
I think for the general public's benefit, like the way I would look at it is what electives were cut, like which ones were on the chopping block and were going to get cut anyways because there wasn't enough interest, but which ones specifically you eliminated a position. It wasn't a layoff, it was a resignation that you didn't backfill, which is essentially the same as a layoff. What was the total impact of that? Class size increased by 2 kids on average, or 3 kids on average for those English classes and the math classes. Which electives were eliminated because the teacher was the one that was running those? Like, it's, because that's the impact to the kid. Like,
Absolutely.
My kid's coming up into high school in the next 5 years or whatever, what electives are they not going to have at their disposal to choose from? We're looking at languages already, like a language position in the middle school. Are my kids going to have that whenever they get to middle school? Are the music classes getting cut? Like, what are those electives that are getting cut? What are those things that, make us such a special place to be? Why people want to opt in, and you're going to start cutting those? That's where we need to show the impact of these are the hard numbers, and specifically what was eliminated because we couldn't backfill for that position.
We can certainly do that.
I will say I ran into an issue or a conversation, we'll say, last week, having attended the Meet the Teachers Night at the high school. I left there with knowledge of my child being in classrooms that were over 30. And I shared that information publicly and got some text that said, why would we tell people that that's what's going on at our high school? That's going to make them choose somewhere else to go. And I'm thinking, along the lines of what you just said, people need to know this so they know that their choices have had impact over the past 10 years of what they've decided not to pay. As a community, we've decided that. And so I think there's that rub, is that we want people to stay here and we want people to know what incredible programs we have, but the reality is we also have the class sizes that have increased. And some people want to hear that and if they know that, they're going to act accordingly. And some people, if they know that and their kid's in 6th grade and they're thinking about what they're going to do in 3 years, they're making a decision mentally to change the trajectory of, are they going to stay here? Are they going to choose a private school or, one of the schools nearby? So.
And I think that's from like an administrative stance, it's a trailing indicator. You don't know what the impact is until it's already happened. Because the kids that are going to come up through the system now, look, they go, let's say a couple more towns open up to school choice and they've got the electives that they want to do and they've got a better sports team or whatever it is and they want to go there. Now that opens up that option because we didn't have it. So you don't see like the impact this year of a kid who was impacted by those. You see it 2, 3, 4 years down the road because you haven't been able to backfill it.
I just think it goes back to Zach's point, like, we can have, understanding the budget's a moving target, we have to make some assumptions on merit and inflation on variable and things, but having the trade-off discussions internally earlier in the cycle so we can think and strategize about how we socialize these things earlier. Because like Norton Neighbors, everything's hitting the fan right after town vote, and it's like having those discussions earlier internally we can strategize a little more than being reactionary.
And I think that, it always comes back to
Money?
even the public conversations happen after things have been
Yes.
put up. So to everyone's general point, if we talk about these in, February, March, April, maybe that generates some interest for people to be coming to town meeting and being vocal and saying enough is enough. We all say it as, we've said enough is enough for a long time, but it takes somebody to do something about it. And, to Bonnie's point, that most people in town have said, no, we're not going to pay.
Well, I think you're your own worst enemy sometimes, though, because you came in with a 9.6% something increased budget to us in the 11th hour. It was my first time on here, and it was like, if you came in with the 3 or so that there was really realistically that it was available without the 750 coming out of stabilization, and early on said, look, this is going to devastate and have some honest credibility with the town about that earlier on in the process, saying, look, we really can't survive with a 3% increase, and we know that we're stuck with a confined to 2.5, we're at that cliff, or whatever you want to call it. It's, I think you did yourself a disservice by waiting and trying to have us be potentially the bad guys, if you will, and saying, look, that's all we have. It's not that we don't want to fund the schools, you get the rest of the town to worry about as well. And I almost think that if you came forward with a straightforward budget that was more realistic, and then said, this is what we really do need. And again, we did hear how we cut your budget. We didn't. We gave you 4% change still, it's just the perceptions here and how you spend it. I think you almost hurt yourself by not being upfront earlier in the process and getting the word out there to look at. We're desperate at this point. We're at a point where we're long past the need for a big infusion of money that put us where North Attleboro is now. They had theirs, 2-3 years ago, and they're still riding the wave, So, it's probably time, but.
So someone said, go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I'll take full responsibility for that. And here's why, and I stand by what I did, and I absolutely understand what you're saying, but Joe and I, prior to Jen, had conversations 100 times, and I said, listen, I don't think the right way to approach the budget is to lie about what your numbers should be. And I said, listen, we should be saying, here's what we need to continue upon the track that we're on. Here's what we need to have level service, et cetera. And the reality is, because of our weird situation with special ed and mandates, et cetera, our numbers go up shockingly high every year. And so I don't think it does anybody a lick of good to go and say, yeah, 3% and we're good. No, 3% we're not. We're not giving you the same level of service we did before. I think my personal opinion is we need to be honest about that, and every town department needs to be honest about that and come forward with, hey, listen, here's the real number. And I get that we're going to cut it, and I've been very straightforward over the years about saying, I understand that this is not a piece of the pie issue, it's a size of the pie issue, right? It's not that our piece isn't big enough. The pie itself is just simply not big enough. It's a finite pie, and there are many departments, and I'm not sitting here saying any one of us is more important than the other. So my approach has always been, hey, everybody just tell us what the real number is, and then as a town, we can sit down and look at it and say, okay, where do our priorities lie? What are we going to do? Because at some point, as a town, we're going to have to make really, really hard choices. And I hate to say it, but the schools are probably going to be the impetus for that because of that stupid cliff that we're coming to. You know, at some point, the number is going to be shockingly big and hard to overcome because we're just not going to have the grants, the COVID money, the stabilization fund that we can trade. It's just not going to be there. So maybe it's time to have those conversations earlier about the town as a whole, not just us, but the town as a whole. And this is kind of how I've always approached it. And I've said, this is why years ago, and Jen, you were here, and Dan, you probably might have been here too, I said, we need to split our budget into 2 budgets. We have 2 budgets. We should actually be voting on 2 budgets. One of them should be SPED, the special ed, which is a mandated budget, and the other one should be the general. And then the town will see, like, hey, listen, the SPED's going up X%, okay, it is what it is. The general's coming down now. I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I don't recall the last time our general education budget actually went up organically. Like, it just doesn't. It just is, the room is not there. We don't have the wiggle room. So again, I'll take responsibility for it. I understand what you're saying. When we come forward with that number, it looks like these guys, they're pulling a fast one. There's, it's the old, you go in and try to buy a car, and the guy says, oh, it's 60,000, and you say, well, it's probably really 50. He's trying to, and it's not that at all. It was, that number, I believe, was a level service number. It wasn't. It was basically just to continue doing what we're doing at the exact same level.
And somebody said it earlier, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was. We are in a position where we're being penalized for doing good things, right? We have done so much with so little for so many years. You look at our students that graduate from Norton High, they have great outcomes. They're going to great schools. And we've been able to do that with minimal funding. I've been here for 20 years. I sat on the other side and got the pink slip, which are not pink, by the way. Every single year, those first 3 years, I was a second grade teacher at JCS. I was laid off over and over and over again. I was here in '07 when we had a 0% increase. And I was here when the following year, I believe, or the year before, when we got a negative. We got money taken away. We lost like 1.6% one year. Those years were so slim. We were really, really in a tough place. And we worked really hard to build back some of the programming. World language at the middle school, our band program, our music program, all of these things that were cut. Our libraries were closed. You would come into the school buildings and all the books on the shelves would be covered in plastic. That was the reality of our schools. And, Dr. Bayetta did a ton of work with the school committee to get us to a place where people were talking about Norton in a really, really great way. And we want to be able to continue that work.
And we still have a library that's not staffed 5 years later. That's the one position we've brought
Haven't been
forward
able to
for
get.
at least 5 years.
And a
it's
volunteer
just-
runs it,
Mhm.
so everybody thinks everything's fine.
But we went from starting
That's not in
with
this
5
room.
libraries closed to 3 by volunteer, and now we're getting there, but it's still, we have 1 library that we still can't, and it may seem insignificant, it might be a $50,000 a year job, but it always is a new position, it's the new position, we can't, and it's the reality of, because it's a new position, it's the first thing out the door of the budget.
And we have 1 individual running all 3 elementary libraries.
And Dinesh, when you talk about the pie, the problem is, as you know, is that the taxpayers are not just a super frugal, they just,
Right.
it's really a tough sell to get them
Well, that's
to
the
buy them
problem, is
anything.
they teach you, they say in business school, there's no free lunch, right? I start to feel like we've done so much, and like just being on the board, hearing all the departments, how much they've done on shoestrings, not to be cynical, but I think some people kind of expect a free lunch, 2.5% and all this level service, and maybe it's time to pull back the veil a little bit and say there's not a free lunch, there's a cliff in multiple departments, and if we're gonna be, very tight come town vote, that there's ramifications for that, because there isn't a free lunch, somebody's gotta pay for it.
Well, to Dinesh's point, I do appreciate the level services budget, because that's what we asked for every department, right? The fire and police gave us their level services, so and then people shouldn't be shocked when we say, you were short level services, that means you have to cut, right? There have to be cuts that are made to the current services. Because there were a lot of people that seemed to be all of a sudden surprised and didn't understand what that all meant. So I think and I also think the 10 positions is a much more indicative number. I think, to Cody's point, it is 10 layoffs, right? We lost 10 teachers or 10 staff.
And experience.
So that's
You lose the
huge.
experience too. That's the part that sometimes stings more than, like if
So we get,
someone's been here 5 years.
You get back the some of the smaller, things, but that's a huge loss,
You're also going to remember too that our townsfolk don't have unlimited resources either. They're going through the same conversations that we're having.
Absolutely.
And come the end of the day, they have to balance when they speak. So I firmly believe we have to look at it that way as well.
And, I've heard Dinesh say many times, we need to have the conversation, what are our priorities, so on and so forth. But you also need to understand is, just your transportation, just this page is bigger than like the whole police budget. I moved here 25 years ago, we had 3 cruisers on the road, there was 10,000 people. There's 20,000 people, there's still 3 cruisers on the road. So, the schools eat up 3/4 of that pie. So, when you say, well, I'm $3 million short, whatever that number is, our hands are tied too. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? We can have that conversation, but what do you wanna do? Do you wanna, you're talking to cover that kind of gap, I'm talking about cutting departments, you're talking about eliminating
Shutting it down,
departments.
yeah.
You're talking about, we're not gonna have a fire department, or we're not gonna have a police department, because those budgets are so small to begin with. So we can have that, I'll have that conversation with anybody, anytime, but the numbers are the numbers. What do you wanna do?
I think the time for having the conversation, quite frankly, is over. Now the conversation needs to be, we've had it, what's the solutions?
I agree, and it's,
People a lot smarter than me will have to figure, I'm not good with budgeting numbers, so it's time for the solutions to now be more prominent than the conversations.
I agree, I run my own business, and we sit around the table and say, what are the solutions? And here, all we hear is problems, and there really is no solution. Well, you need more revenue, how are you gonna get it? It's just incredibly frustrating.
Unfortunately, the potential solutions are few and far between, right? So, the obvious one is raise taxes, and we all know the high hurdle there. So the other ones have been institute something like school choice, and those are solutions that we've enacted over the years to try and fill those gaps. But I think we're running out of possibilities at this point, is unfortunately the reality. And not one person here tonight has said something that wasn't absolutely true, right? Pie's not big enough. Pie's probably not going to get bigger. We need solutions. We do the best we can with what we have, and all those things are true, and unfortunately, they'll be true next year and the year after as well, unfortunately. I appreciate the conversation we're having, I'm just not sure where we go from here, quite honestly.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, so.
I'm going in circles.
Right, and there have been statements tonight that the same person has said in prior conversations we've had. This is nothing new, we're not breaking new ground here, honestly. We might have told you a little bit about our budget that you didn't know before, but generally, you knew that we were in dire straits, we knew we were in dire straits, we knew your hands are tied, we know the town's makeup, and, these aren't revelations, quite frankly. They're
You know,
talented.
the state is
Yeah.
not gonna help.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some of these breakdowns are eye-opening, to kind of see.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
they are.
it's hard to kind of figure out what's going on when someone says, oh, well, this budget's $1.4 million. Okay, when you see this broken out
Yes.
by how many students and exactly what's getting spent, that's something that you can go to other people in the community and say, look at this, like, this is the problem, and hopefully change some minds, but, you know, it's hard to do when you've just got a big number.
Joe, the problem is like Zach said, like, then where do you get that money from? You know, like,
Right, but.
it's,
Do you
Yes,
know
like
of other school districts that maybe have like grant writers on staff that could maybe spend the time to search out more grant money? Is that a thing that happens in public schools?
I mean, so we apply for,
Look at 'em.
you know, tons and tons of
We
grants.
had more,
Yeah.
a staff person dedicated to that.
On a daily basis, one of my primary roles as the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning is I'm on the DESI grants page every day. In fact, we just submitted another grant today. We have one already in the pipeline. So that is a regular process. That's something that we look at and we discuss just about every day.
In our meeting earlier tonight, Vinny and I presented on, almost $250,000 of grant money that we've received
Yeah, we did the tail end
to
of that.
do all of the SEL and mental health work, which is still work that needs to be done. We just didn't have the opportunity to fund it through our budget. Karen is always out there looking for tech grants. She just got one this week to purchase Chromebooks for all of our paraprofessionals.
It wasn't a criticism.
Yes, no, I know.
Like, I was just like, if there was like more grants, like
There
if
was a-
someone had more time.
There
like,
was a brief
I know
period
you
of
all
time
have
where we
finite-
contracted with an outside company that would help us with grants. And what we found is that they were saying, here, apply for this grant. And then we
Yeah.
were all spending all of our time applying for the grants and not getting any of them.
Yeah.
So it was one of those situations where we're like, you know what, I think this is probably not the best partnership for it.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of large districts do have grant writers. But, you know, for us, like.
We're not a large district.
Karina, who was our district media coordinator, was our splurge. And she was really great about presenting information to the community and getting all the great news out about Norton schools. And her position was cut last year. So Karen Winsberg, our Director of Instructional Tech, and her department have taken on a lot of that. My administrative assistant has taken on a lot of that. But there are things that we just can't do anymore without that position as well.
Okay, anybody else have any questions, comments? We're gonna close this meeting.
well, I want to thank you guys for coming to join us tonight. I know,
Thank you.
I'm cynically, I'm not sure that we will come up with solutions, but I do think the conversations are constructive, and it's important that we have them. If for nothing else, then just to kind of get information out there, like you said, and let everybody know exactly what we're dealing with. Because it is a complicated, weird, twisted budget. I don't think anybody in town probably has the same structure of budget that we do, unfortunately. So on behalf of the school committee, I want to thank you guys for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Yes, Joe?
I make a motion that we adjourn the finance committee meeting.
Second. Okay, motion and a second to adjourn. I will take roll call vote to adjourn. Kevin?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Sandy?
Yes.
Joe?
Immediately begin our meeting.
Paul?
Yes.
Cody?
Yes.
Zach?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Hi, to my yes. We adjourn at 9:09.